All right, so we're back here with Southern Cross Gold. Last update in March, as always. Happy smiles and happy faces. You've doubled the share price since then. Unbelievable. It's been happening like every time we speak, or even better than that. So you're now just below 2 billion Canadian market cap. You have a very good balance sheet. And I thought we could just start by, because in May you sort of released the spend plan for the coming 2-3 years, basically, and you're financed to do that. So if we just go through these items step by step. But first, I could briefly just ask, at the end of this year, what cash balance would you project to be at? And then we'll dig into the infill drilling, exploration, the tunnel, and so
on. Yeah, so around the 135 mil in the bank, something like that. We've started surface works and we've got an extra rig there now. So a few properties that we've purchased, so that we're settling on, so around that number.
Right. And if we go to the infill drilling, so just sort of briefly, the timing of when it starts to accelerate. I assume the rig allocation now, you're already predominantly on infill, maybe 3 or 4 rigs are on expansion, but what's the sort of constellation currently with the rigs?
Yeah, there's 8 rigs in the core area in that 1.4 down to 1 kilometre depth. And that's infill and expansion. When you're filling in between, say, 100-metre holes, you're always adding more ounces because you're finding things, not always, but generally finding more ounces because you're filling in gaps where this mineralisation is very consistent. So it is a mix, even any one hole of expansion and infill, and then we're infilling around some of the higher grade areas that add ounces too, because as you collect more data, you become more confident and able to subdomain the high grade areas as you get literally more pierce points into them. So it's also expanding ounces in that way and increasing the grade. So infill and expansion, 8 rigs, and then 2 rigs along the trend and at depth. So there's 1 rig drilling down to 1.5 kilometres at the moment to demonstrate the system has another 0.5 kilometre footprint below the current core area, and there's another rig along strike and on parallel zones, and eventually we'll go out to up to 8 kilometres away.
Yeah. So I mean, you allocated 50 million Canadian, basically, just above that for the get to inferred resource Q1 27. What's the sort of breakdown of that? How many meters are that projected to be? What's the calculation? What's the scope? And what's the spacing required for inferred on average? What's the sort of the breakdown of the that estimation?
Yeah, so it was a 200 kilometre, 53 million Canadian, 60 million Australian budget, and we're on that pathway now. So there's something like, at any point with backlogs and everything, it's not it's in terms of where the holes in the system, it's something like 180 kilometres to go or something like that, 170. So that aim is to drill out a substantial resource. I won't name the number because it's being far too forward-looking and not within the regulations to state a resource before you drill it. But I can say that every metre is converting about every metre of drilling is converting about 7.5 ounces from the exploration target into the inferred resource today. And of course, we've got a resource that we're updating monthly, so we know exactly where we sit internally with SRK, the same group that reports resources or advises on resources for both Costerfield and Fosterville, our peers and neighbours and good friends. The inferred spacing is 25 metres along strike and 50 to 60 metres vertically on each different vein. And of course, we drill these veins, and remembering, just reminding everyone, it's like the rungs of a ladder. You're looking down from the sky, that's the host, and then the veins are at a high angle to that. So basically east-west host, north-south veins, and the veins start at surface and go down to the great depths and very consistent in that up and down direction, hence the wider drill spacing. And to drill this out, we work out where the rails are with control holes, and then when we come back and discover and infill when we know the sides of the rails of the ladder. We drill parallel to those rails, but at a high angle to the veins.
Yeah.
And so we're hitting multiple vein sets per drill hole at any one level, at any one drill out.
Yeah, that's a thankful morphology to have. In terms of the, so I mean, in relation to the current exploration target you released, we discussed in March. Could one expect that the inferred resource would cover that entire area that we outlined with the current sort of released exploration target, or would it be in excess to that? Just give sort of an indication. Bit forward looking.
You're a good call.
Yeah, I have to.
So the exploration target that was drill constrained, but lots of extensions that are not close enough to put into a resource and assumptions between drill holes, was 2.2 to 3.2 million ounces back in last March, ounces gold equivalent.
Yeah.
That was at 8.2 to 10.3 grams gold equivalent, 20% coming from antimony, pretty much whatever grade cutoff you use, and 80% coming from gold. So I'm very thankful that gold forms the basis of this deposit with a very, very good and strong critical metals flavour. So we've done engineering work to determine the productivity of what we think this future mine could produce on a tonnes per annum, and then we've looked at trying to drill out a 10-year exercise first up. So whatever this will produce on an annual basis, and then looking to build a project, because that's how we build financial models around these projects. We form net present value models and discount them over a 10-year period, and pretty much anything post 10 years is not worth anything in terms of those economic models. So you maximise it at 10 years, and that's what the sort of aim has been. So it will be towards the lower end, not the higher end of that exploration target. That exploration target is getting bigger anyhow. So we think the natural footprint will be another million or so ounces at the top end of that core area. And then, of course, we've got the area below there where this will double in depth potential. And then that's only 10% of the 1 kilometre of the 10-kilometre trend, say. So there's a lot of room to move to make it bigger, even though we're focusing on a number of different things. Remembering, we never forget about a regional exploration. I know you'll come to that, the budget item, in a moment.
Yeah, so I mean, basically 200 kilometers, 7.5 ounces, so that's 1.5 million ounces if you extrapolate. And then you have some amount, obviously, already in that inventory. So it sounds like 2 million ounces just by sort of reading between the lines, or perhaps a bit more, 2.5, I don't know, 1.8 to 2.5.
Yeah, in that ballpark, you've worked out the maths, right?
Yeah.
It's certainly at the higher end of your estimate.
And you released your recoveries, etc. So the in-situ recoverable will be very good. Excellent recoveries for antimony as well. Above 90% it seems, and for gold excellent too. So one could expect probably if you're designing a 10-year life, a 200,000 equivalent recoverable production sort of thing that you would be around or somewhere close to that, at least it seems to me. Hopefully.
Yeah. So you know your business well, and that's the ballpark where this is heading. We get good recoverability, or good conversion is actually the term to use, from resource into mineable shapes. It's a cut-off business in this deposit, and there's grade between the high grades too. So it's just where you form the basis, and some of the MSO work that we've been doing, 60% of our stopes are 2 meters and 40% are wider up to 20 meters. The conversion is very good in that that initial engineering work. It's high 80% that we're converting from that internal resource into the mineable shapes in those studies. Dilution will be a factor, as it will be in any thin vein mine. Something like probably, and we haven't got the numbers, but we're sort of ballparking around the 20% level from a dilution point of view. But that's very hard to work out at this moment, where there's gaps in the resource, etc. So that truly is an unknown number. We've got a dilution model that we haven't incorporated in any of the mining studies, and they're sitting at around about 0.5 gram gold itself without the antimony inclusion in that. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Absolutely, all early days, but it certainly very much works in our view on its mineability, and it's not going to be the world's largest gold mine, but when you do the per value ton of rock and then subtract the cost, if you look at some of our peers around us in terms of cost per ton, you're working on a very high margin here, and depending on what gold price you use, if it's long-term gold price or the craziness of where we see the gold price today. I'm not saying it's coming down or going up or down, but it makes these mines incredibly more profitable at where it is today, and you see that on the balance sheets of the producers. So it's going to be one of the highest margin gold mines globally in a tier 1 jurisdiction, and multi-million ounce with lots of ounces still to be delineated and found.
So I guess I'll ask this, in your, what could be a reasonable daily or milled throughput to sort of think about? Is it a few thousand tons, like 2.5 to 4,000, or is it 1,500 to 3,000? And obviously people can then perhaps infer what sort of average grades you would be thinking about. What would be...
Yeah, so way too early to give definitive numbers without economic studies.
Yeah.
In a recorded interview, but we're working on a 10-year. You can exercise, like I said, you can back calculate it almost from the calculations, the numbers that we've talked about. So let's not verge on giving forward-looking statements without engineering studies, but there's enough information for those who are savvy enough to at least work back and think about these. And we've given grade ranges, and in our exploration target there, 8 to 8.3 to 10.6, I think. So you can work on those. I mentioned that the grade is increasing as we get more data into this project, etc. So it's not going to be at the lower end; it's going to be at the higher end of that range, etc. So they're the kind of things that we're seeing. It's all progressing well. It's hanging up as we continue to drill it, hanging together, I should say, and getting better, which is what you want to see in these deposits. And here's another little fact that you'll be interested in, because you're a details person. In these deposits, if you look at the resource to reconciliation in these epizonal Victorian deposits, something like about 15 to 20% of the ounces are off book. So rule of thumb, not saying that's going to be happening here because we haven't ever had a chance to reconcile, but they're the kind of, this is just more gold than can ever be modelled. So the gold model is generally at a minimum, not a maximum.
Yeah, but you're starting. I mean, you're still seeing as you drill more, as you increase data density, a ability to increase the top cut essentially. So you're seeing average grades increasing the more you drill still. Although I would expect that would start to taper at some point, obviously, in terms of how quickly.
Yeah, well, there is a natural, exactly. There's a natural grade of any deposit. We don't think we're quite there yet. And we're treating this, our resource modelling consultants are treating this conservatively, of course, because that's the way that we need, of course, to operate and do our business. And nobody tries to overemphasize a grade early on in a project before you've collected enough data. The other upside that's occurring here is that we have these veins, and in the centre of them are these high-grade cores, and then they have a brittle vein array around them. The high-grade cores are thinner; they're 10 centimetres to a metre wide, and they can run from ounces to thousands of grams. And then the brittle vein array is 2 to 10 grams, and that's what gives the width, and the grade is contained in those high-grade cores. We need at least 3 pierce points into any one high-grade core to start subdomating that. If you have only got 2 hits, so we've got 2 extremely high-grade hits that look like they're part of the same high-grade core, that's just severely top cut in the model. But if you get that third hole and fourth and fifth, then you can start subdomating that as a separate body, and by just the way that these things are being treated, and then you can range restrict those grades so you don't let them smear. You have very conservative spatial assumptions around how far they go beyond those drill holes, but the top cuts in those subdomains are much higher than they are in the lower grade domains, of course, by natural distribution. But just subdomating those veins rather than having them two high grade hits top cut, right? And you've got low grade and high grade domains mixed, which is not ideal, right? But when you can subdomain them, the grade will of course rise too. So there's lots of things that are happening in this deposit as it hangs together, and those kind of that kind of exercise continues.
And this sort of feeds into the decline rationalization, one of the rationalizations, I guess, for it. But could you, before we get to that, in terms of reconciliation, I presume, and perhaps working with the PEA or perhaps the PFS to get additional information. But the timeline for the decline, can you use a brief reminder about that, the sort of the steps and the scope of what the permit allows, and what the initial sort of budgeted extent of the decline will mean for the project?
Yeah, so the decline's 1 kilometre long,
yep,
at 160 metres vertically deepest, at its deepest point. It has a second means of egress and a raised bore at the end. It progresses from basically south of Apollo through the rising sun the Golden Dyke mineralisation, and comes out the other side. You see that my AI camera is talking about dimensions. It's coming to zoom in, but so that's the decline, and we need a work plan approved for that. That's in submission. We've given guidance that we always hope that will come this year. So we're getting towards middle of November when this is recorded. So we are working very closely with the Victorian authorities to address all the issues that need to be addressed, or all the data that needs to be provided around that. Remember, we put the application in late August, early September, so we're on a pretty quick timeline here, and got a very proactive regulator who wants to make decisions rationally and fairly with good information, but they're not here to muck around, and they permitted 4 mines in the last 7 or 8 months.
Yeah.
And another decline from a competitor. That means that surface works will start almost immediately after the decline is permitted. That surface works will be forming the box cut, waste rock piles, pads, dam, water dam, site infrastructure, etc. So that will start. That's a 2 or 3 month exercise. Then we'll bring in underground contractors to complete the build. It's a 6 to 9 month build, and then we can get another 12 drill rigs underground, which is the main purpose of that decline, is to speed up the drilling. We've got 10 rigs at surface that we spoke about. Another 12 will make it 22. Will make it the biggest driller, in Australia, if not the world, on a pre-development project at the moment. And then the permit allows us to explore. We need a work plan variation to take a bulk sample, which we will. We'll need to do a lot more met work, but we wanted to keep it simple first up and just leave it at that exploration decline so we could start the work. But that will occur, and then we're underground. We're seeing the mineralisation, de-risking it geologically as well. Progressive permitting is very much a part of our approach, so we don't go with 500 pages in 3 years to the regulator, but we're progressively de-risking the project from a hydrogeological point of view, doing a lot of work around the water, understanding the water and the implications, how much water there is, what dewatering the project to get the decline down means, a lot of vegetation work, cultural heritage work, all those kind of things that need to be done. So there's a hell of a huge body of work that's gone into this application for the decline, and stage one to increase the drilling and understand the mineralization and eventually get a lot more met results.
So I mean, it's multi-purpose, obviously, but it sounds like it sounds like the main utility will kick in, getting from the PEA to the PFS basically at that stage where you increase infill drilling, which I presume would go from 20 meter lateral, 50 meter vertical to, I don't know, 10, 15 lateral, 30 vertical or something would be fair to estimate. So a big increase in amount of drilling required to go to M&I. From inferred.
Not absolutely completely, because everyone thinks of it as a doubling of, or more than a doubling of meters, right? If you double half the drill spacing, let's say that, which is 4 times the amount of drilling.
Yes.
If you go from 50 to 50 to 25 by 25, it's 4 times as much drilling. But the way we're drilling this is actually, because we bought resource geos in early, we had them come through the journey of learning about how this mineralization hangs together geologically and then in the resource model, but also planning how to drill it out. So we would get away with a lot broader spacing of inferred if we just chose to do that, but then it would basically stuff up and make it much harder to drill out the indicated, and would mean we'd have to drill a lot more indicated. So we're actually going to quite a, in geological terms, a conservative inferred resource, so we can minimize the amount of indicated drilling. So it's really like a dice with the number 5. You get these stepped off holes, and so it's probably another third to half amount of drilling, so much less drilling to get the indicated than you may think in this deposit. More work for us to do to understand all of that. And there's some areas we're drilling out now to indicated beneath Golden Dyke to really understand, a block of mineralization under that area. So that's happening as we speak. So that will inform us across the whole deposit, and collecting that weight of evidence rather than just sort of guessing and telling you now. But it's been a relatively conservative approach, so we can minimise the indicated drill out, which is of course very, very much needed, as you've stated, to go to PFS.
Right. And the metallurgical update, obviously excellent, 92 to 95.6 gold, 83 to 92.7 antimony, so very high antimony as well, which was great to see. Can you just comment on what preliminarily, you haven't done all of the work yet, but preliminarily, what would the flow sheet look like? Would it be similar to Costerfield, say, or would it be a bit different or better, or just some context for these high recoveries?
Yeah, so we mimicked the Costerfield flow sheet with this test work, and then in the first stage, cited tests, and then we came back and did a bit more work in the second stage to look at what geometallurgically was more akin to Sunday Creek. Costerfield and Sunday Creek were treated together for a number of years, so they do have a very similar flow sheet. So that is gravity up front and gravity in the middle and gravity at the back end to get as much of the free gold. We've got more than 80% free or native or metallic gold in this deposit, as Costerfield does. We're getting about 45 to 50% of our gold through gravity, very similar to what Costerfield did in its upper parts, and now they're getting 70% recoveries of gravity as they've gone deeper into these higher grade free gold zones, which these epizonal deposits transition into, which was what the Swan Zone was at Fosterville. And we see the same transition absolutely at Sunday Creek. And then after gravity, we have a float, and we produce an antimony gold float, as Costerfield does. So it's a relatively simple process. We invoked a separate float, so we inhibit the pyrite from floating. Antimony stibnite, which is the antimony sulfide mineral, floats very quickly. It's hydromorphic phobic, I should say, so it floats very quickly. We suppress the pyrite and then float that off in the next cell or the cell down from the stibnite float, and that way we can keep the pyrite and plus or minus the arsenopyrite, which hosts the arsenopyrite in these deposits, out of the antimony gold con, which creates an amazingly clean antimony gold con. It will be one of the cleaner antimony gold cons globally, as far as I can see. We don't have a huge data set, but 0.1 or 0.2% arsenic is very low. The threshold's 0.6, coming to at least in China today, because they're the country that dominates antimony smelting. And then we have about 40% of our gold into that antimony gold con, and then about 10 to 15% in that pyrite gold con, which still contains that free gold, about 80% free gold. So that potentially could go to a third-party smelter, or could be leached on site or at a nearby facility through a little CIL plant.
So by inference with Costerfield, if you have the numbers at hand, but do you know what their payability for antimony and overall gold is? And thereby we can infer what it would be for you. It looks to be better, probably, based on what you're saying.
Yeah, I do know lots of payabilities across the industry, and they're not public domain. But what I can say is that gold gets pretty much paid in full.
Yeah.
And in that, well, absolutely in the gravity con, and in the antimony gold, they pay very close to the full amount of gold. And that's the nature of these smelters, is they've had to retool over the last 10 to 15 years to seek antimony gold cons as opposed to antimony alone, because the nature of global deposits has changed. We can talk to that if you want to, but they've had to chase the antimony gold cons, and to get those antimony gold cons, they pay very well for the gold, and then they get the antimony. And the antimony is, depending on price, and in any one market, you're probably getting paid anywhere between 50 to 70% of the antimony in the con. So that's there's a lot of devil in that detail, but there's a rule of thumb.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just a thinking exercise. It's sort of a footnote at this point, because it becomes like a small percent of the recoverable value, anyways. But the government interest is there, so perhaps there could be some. I don't know if it would primarily be lock-in of price or lock-in of offtake, or exactly how that could be structured, but there is strategic, obviously, huge interest in antimony from various governments, not only Australia, obviously, but the big boy United States too. So I don't know if that could reflect somehow and improve payability, or improve these numbers further. But we don't need to delve into that discussion again. I'm sure you've had that too many times at this point. We'll see what happens. The deposit certainly doesn't need that support to it's tier 1 on its own. So
no, it's 20% antimony, 80% gold. Yeah. So in terms of recoverable value, and Victoria has huge strength in that it has some of the only mine offtake now and in the future, and antimony's always been a very important metal here, and will be so. So I think your comment is very well made.
And just an interesting thought that crossed my mind. I mean, obviously, people might have thought what happened with Mandalay, what has happened with Mandalay Resources, the merger exactly of equals and so on, and it is a nice comparison with the flow sheets, etc., etc. Could you just briefly mention what their average grades are that they are actually feeding to their mill? Because one could have thought that it could make sense. I don't know what the distance is to ship ore, but shipping ore from a higher grade Southern or Sunday Creek to that mill wouldn't perhaps be insanity, but maybe a few comments from you. Maybe I'm out biking on this one, but
you love delving. Listen, we very close to all our peers. It's a small industry here, and Mandalay is now Allocation, and they're in a wonderful position now, because Costerfield's been an undercapitalised mine essentially from all aspects for a lot of its life. Now it's not necessarily that. They have a very different geological morphology than we do. So they have very thin veins that average about 20 centimeters. They dilute out to a mining width of 1.8 meters, and that's about a 10 to 12 gram head grade that they produce depending on any one given month. So extremely high grade, thinner structures, whereas we've got the broader structures and very similar metallurgy in the free gold.
Right. And they do about 60,000 ounces per year or something like this, right? Still.
Something like that. Their antimony has come way down as they're getting deeper into these deposits and getting to more sulfur salt rich, high grade free gold, gravity recoverable gold, I should say. And so their antimony has gone from, over 3,000 to 4,000 tons an annum down to about 2,000 at the moment as they've got into the deeper parts. But they made new discoveries to the west that are shallower and antimony rich. So I think I would expect to see differences in their antimony output as those shallower areas come into the mine plan.
And the PEA, I expect that the metallurgical work you've done now, would that be sufficient, or do you need to cover more of the areas that will have been infilled because there will be variability or something? I mean, I presume that the variability is mainly vertical and not lateral here, generally speaking, so perhaps the current sampling is sufficient for the targeted inferred resource for the PEA.
Well, we had something like 140 samples across the project in that second stage of work, and you're very right. The mineralogy and the geometallurgy, the metallurgical variation is very similar from what we see horizontally, but it changes as you mentioned vertically, and I've spoken to a number of times here. Absolutely, we believe we've got enough of work. We've got a flow sheet for a PEA, but we're not slowing down here. Time is our greatest enemy, so we're going through a lot more met work, as I mentioned, not only from the decline. We've got a lot of drill core now that we can use. So we're going to that third stage work, and it all depends on where this product's going to go and what it looks like. And we produced a very high grade, low arsenic con, which is highly marketable, but depending where it may go, it might need to be such high grades, and we're offsetting grade versus recoverability of antimony and doing all that kind of work. We've got a flow sheet, and that looks very good from the rougher point of view in the mill, and we've got more work to do around the cleaner. We've got to do comminution work and just finding the optimum grain size and grinding size, which is very early days at the moment. Like I said, we essentially copied a flow sheet of a pier around the corner where we knew it behaved well, but there's always variability in these things in the detail. So from a high level, we're in a good position. From the detail, always more work to be done.
Right. And then let's dig into the actual exploration step out. So I guess we'll pull up the visuals here, and I mean, as always, you're putting out consistently way more 100 gram meter plus holes than anyone could have ever dreamt of. So that's great. But let's take a look at the expansion progression and so on.
Let's have a look at how it's progressed. I think is a reasonable sum. I'm just moving a window here so I don't keep looking up to the left to get to you. So here's just how it's built by the drill string over the up until earlier this year. Looking at time down here, looking at a longitudinal section from the surface down to 1 kilometre. Looking at the grades, have a look at the red and the pinks, which are plus 50 or plus 100 gram meters equivalent. Remember, 20% coming from the antimony, and just how it's developed through pierce points in that long section. So when we bored it here, and the deepest hole on the project was that 180 metre shaft that you can see there. Some yellow hits around near surface in the oxide. The oxide tended to smear the grade, make it a bit wider. Then when we held it in Mawson and we put in 7 or 8 kilometres of drilling, had some hits here at depth that showed there was a few hopes, there was a few pink hits plus 100 gram hits. And then when we came to late 22, we put this hole in, which was hole 50, and that showed 300 meters of mineralization, 13 high-grade structures and lots of pink. And then we followed it up over the next year, and certainly it improved, and we drilled that out, and that's where we had a first up exploration target. And then a year later, we put the second exploration target out that we've spoken to earlier. And that area of that exploration target's in here. There's a hell of a lot more mineralization that was not included because we didn't have the drill density to include it. We've now shown that Golden Dyke's got a lot better and looking just like it's the extension of Rising Sun, which is this block here. We're getting better results here in Apollo as it gets deeper and out through here. We've even now delineated this Apollo East. So this is the area where we see that that exploration target can increase to a much larger number, because there's still a hell of a lot more to be found. If we just look at that in a little bit more science, and you'll like this one. This is that longitudinal section in the same way, at the 1.4 kilometers down to about 1 kilometer here, and it shows the transition of these deposits as they progress to depth. And we talked about that metallurgical change and a lot more free gold coming in at depth. But this is arsenic over antimony. So the arsenic's pretty consistent from the surface to depth, but the antimony drops off when you get to depth. And so the blue shows where there's a higher arsenic to antimony ratio, or sorry, a lower ratio, I should say. So you're getting the blue down here because the arsenic's higher, the antimony's higher. The antimony's higher in these upper parts, so you get the ratio being lower. But when you start to drop off the antimony, you get the red, and you can see the blue to the red where the antimony is dropping off is pretty much a line. And this is the Rising Sun area. You can see we've got quite a bit of that mineralization. We've seen some very good results there, and that's where our best results in the project are. You can see that, as I was inferring there before, we're just starting to see it in these other areas, be it Golden Dyke or Christina here, and even Apollo that was drilled a lot in the early days in the upper levels. So there's a very good argument that the best is still to come in this project, at least for 4 out of the 5 areas, with the other being Apollo East here, that we haven't even got down to yet into those areas. So it's pretty exciting for us, without a doubt, as we're starting to learn more. And then that 1 kilometer depth by 1.4 kilometer long section, we look at it in the bigger picture. Here it is with below the old mines that we've drilled, and that area that I talked about, which was a subset of the exploration target, and more areas to come. Now, we are putting one hole down here at the moment that I spoke to earlier, 1.5 kilometers depth, to determine whether the mineralization extends beneath that red box. And then we have all these old mines through here that really, we've only put 2.5 kilometers of drilling, and where those extra 2 rigs will focus going forward. There's 0.5 meter at 15 grams was the best result we got in that early stage drilling. So if we do that, there's the red to the white hatching, there's still a lot of area to explore. So there's a lot of this area to expand into. This is Fosterville at the same scale, just to show an equivalent style of mineralization. They're drilling now down at around that 2 kilometer level. So we know those systems can continue to depth. I'll let you direct me to, if you want, the 3-dimensional story, but
yeah. Let's open to verify. I think first, just to crystallize since March when you released the exploration target, just showcase. It seems that you've already stepped out successfully, both east, west, and to depth. Some of the veins that's sort of starting to indicate. excess of that exploration target. Can you just comment a bit more on that and show some of those holes?
Yeah, let's talk to that. So here's the area that we were looking at in that core area, if you like, through here. And this is the extensions along strike that the regional extensions. The yellow here that I'm highlighting in blue are all the properties that we own now. So I'll just try that again. These areas through here. So we've got about 3,500 acres now that we purchased, especially to the south, where there's three or more kilometres of our own land to support development of this project and minimise the impacts to the north, where we've got something like 20 properties within the 2 kilometres to the north. So going underground, this is the plan for the decline, just to show you that. You can see that there in the raise, and that's about 160 metres vertically and 1 kilometre long, and you can see some of the infrastructure out there to the right. And then looking in plan view, just to talk to the way it looks looking down. This is what we talked about before: the sides of the ladder, the rails of the ladder, and the rungs in this orientation, basically east, west, to north, south. And the drilling orientation is initially drilled like this to get the rails of the ladder, and then we come back and drill in this orientation at a high angle to the veins, either east, west, or west to east. And then if we take that underground again, this is where we can start to talk. And this is not updated completely with some of the new results. The yellow holes are those that are in the lab or still to report. We've reported a couple of those over the last weeks that haven't been updated in this model, but this will do the job. So what we've found post this model, if you like, is that it's so hard to see at this scale, but there's basically a zone in here. It's about 160 meters width that hasn't been drilled, because we've drilled these deposits. This is Golden Dyke and this is Rising Sun separately. So that looks like they're just a continuation of the one body, arguably, as we've started to drill this out. The area here at Golden Dyke is looking more and more like Rising Sun. If we just look at these numbers here, that's another way of showing how this thing improves at depth. In this case, we're looking at greater than 300 gram hits in the red, and you can see them up through here, but you can see there's a hell of a lot through here, there's a few here, and there's a couple of stragglers up through here. So that's that transition that we were talking to, and we're now starting to see a lot more of those develop here in Golden Dyke as we're getting into that transition. And this is just looking more and more like its neighbour, but also just maybe joined. None of these things were incorporated into the exploration target, which is in the blue here that we talked to before. We've also been able to drill more mineralization out through here and around Christina, which is this area, which these yellow holes show here. So there's a lot of expansion to the west of that exploration target, and still so much more to come as we start to drill Apollo at depth down through here also. So a lot of mineralization to focus on. How do we build the ounces as quickly as possible is ultimately the question. So focusing on grade is no doubt that, and focusing on those higher grade drill outs to pull out those high grade cores is important, because ounces build faster than ounces build grade here. Grade builds ounces faster than volume in isolation, but there's still a lot of areas that need to be drilled and pulled into that resource in and outside that exploration target, which is the blue veins you can see there.
Could you showcase this 1.5 kilometer deep hole where that would be projected to intersect the vein sets?
A hole east to west, because we can't drill. We need to drill those control holes first, but it's something like down here that you can see. So that was pretty much like we were looking at before, where we're drilling in that core area. Another kilometre down would be something like that. And the blue dot is the hole that we're drilling. And we do have a plan to drill another hole somewhere in that position also. And then, of course, all the dike position is shown in green here, and there's some parallel zones, but you can see the area that we've still got to drill out there. So it's certainly early days. We'll be drilling for a long time, but our job here is to create fundamental value by drilling out the blue hatch, and to focus on market value by continuing to do things like this and like this in the yellow, if you like. So market value versus fundamental value are still very important to get right in any company, and we've got $20 million of drilling to focus in the yellow hatched area, and 60 million, I'm talking Aussie here now, in the blue hatched area. So it's basically one quarter is focused on exploration and 3/4 on the drill out area.
When would you expect to have this deep hole that you read, the initial one beneath Rising Sun / Apollo, basically? When would you project to hit min there, or hit the structure?
Soon. It's been caught up for a month, literally, in a fault, and we've had to wedge off, and it's been one of those holes that you just don't want to drill in terms of time. It got caught at depth. Of course, the first time we've drilled to depth in these areas, so we're learning about the ground conditions down there. So it's before the end of the year, we'll hit the position and get that hole completed.
And in terms of sort of immediate allocation for the expansionary rigs before year end, how will they move on, or where's the other allocated currently, and what will the deep drilling rig go next?
Well, we've got the other rig on essentially, if I go back into plan view, we've got the other rig on this parallel zone at the moment, and then the one rig going to depth. And then we'll start moving out shortly into these areas out through here with the 2 rigs underneath the old mines and beyond. Remember, we've done a hell of a lot of IP and soil, so there's a lot more targets than shown out through here. But we'd like to build ounces, if possible, closer to here in a fundamental point of view. But a big hit out here, if we could ever find something in similar tenor, would create a lot of excitement and market value.
And just the initial comments on the first 2.5 kilometers of drilling at Leviathan, how many holes did that total, and just what are you seeing so far in terms of encouragement? I mean, you have one nice hit there, that's half an ounce over half a meter. Narrow, but good for 2.5 kilometers, obviously.
Yeah, it was about 3 kilometers away. But we did hit gold in pretty much every hole. That was the higher grade. There was another higher grade hit, but the key point is that these mines out here were mined down to 90 meters. So they were chasing something of significance in the late 1800s to mine down to 90 meters. It's the same ladder structure. So, and in fact, if I had the LiDAR on, I'd show you, but there's basically the east-west dike and altered sediment either side, and then they mine the veins in this orientation also. So it's exactly the same structural host and to mineralization. A lot more arsenic with no antimony out through here so far. So are we deeper in the system and we're seeing a more eroded area? Is the question. But there's much less of the antimony out in those areas. Yeah, so and we've learned a lot about how to drill out the core area that we can now apply to here since the 18 months or so that we've drilled in those regional areas in the blue. There was something like 10 holes or something to that effect drilled out there, 2 or 3 holes into each one of those areas. So they were just very early stage holes to try and understand the system rather than anything else at the time.
And the follow-up now, what will be sort of the initial, it's hole by hole, I understand, but you're moving both rigs there, you said. So what will be the approach? Are you stepping out a bit more on strike, just testing other zones of the soil anomalies or structure, or are you following to depth, or what will be the main approach?
Well, I'll be drilling control holes and then east-west holes, no doubt, into the target. So we understand the host, and then we can stay within the host to be at a high angle to the mineralization. So that's an obvious learning and approach that we really didn't have that same understanding as much. We were trying to drill east-west holes too early without really understanding the host. So we were a bit more confident when we had this information, I think, or at least we had a slightly more bullish than cautious approach that we now understand that we need to take in these areas. We'll drill around the old mines again because we've got the hits there, and that's where the gold is. But there's a lot of targets, but defined by geology, soils, and IP. Lots of targets, and we've got to test a lot of those just to determine what those responses are in the soils and the IP specifically. There's more. There's a lot more chargeability that we see. This area is chargeable for the most part because of that pyritic halo that is within the dike and the altered sediment. Some of the best IP anomalies are away from those green areas, and so we've got to really determine what they are. Some will be lithological, no doubt, but some will be related to mineralization, we hope. Another learning is that we learned here that some of the best mineralization, if we just zoom back in, is blind to surface. So we don't want to assume everything that's at surface is what we're going to find. So, this area, Rising Sun, had one vein come to surface as a fault come through here, and that means that it develops a lot more of these structures as you go to depth. So one little vein that was mined down to 40 meters or something has led to, in the exploration target here, I think this is something like 1 million ounces at 12 grams equivalent in that area there. So we can't be too smart.
Okay, and if we sort of just zoom out for next year, obviously by end of next year you would have finished the infill drilling more or less, the 200,000 or 200 kilometers of infill drilling, and then but the scope of expansion here, what would be your hope in terms of expanding out on the main little window we're seeing here with the 1.2 kilometers of strike? Would you want to extend beyond that a bit, or what do you think you can achieve or sort of prove out expansionary wise next year?
In terms of, we've still got a lot of work to do in this block. The resource area that we will drill out will be something like, well, maybe something like that, I imagine, or some said that's a real scribble, but it's focused on the highest grade areas and where we can build ounces quickest. But there's a hell of a lot more expansion drilling to be done through there. We're not going to drill out at 1,500 meters depth, but we want an indication. And as I mentioned, it was one other hole that we plan to put along that 1.5 km strike. We'd love to see another hit out, 3 to 8 kilometers away, which is 3 to 8 kilometers between here and here, with the same tenor, and be drilling out another one of these bodies. So that is the aspiration. Very good chance for that geologically to occur, but exploration is a risky business. So we've got the drill program budgeted. Don't find anything without really going for it, and there's a lot of targets to really go for. So we're developing a separate exploration department, so it's not focused on the production side of the business of drilling, and where we've got, we'll have 22 rigs in these areas, 20 rigs in those areas, and a couple of rigs outside. So 20 rigs is an overwhelming exercise. It will be 30 geologists and 1,000 meters of core a day. That becomes overwhelming. So you want these guys to be thinking, these people to be thinking a bit separately, but learning from here, but taking that learning and there'll be a couple of people thinking separately about that exploration.
Michael, when you say 20 rigs, that would be when you have the underground access, because then you were adding 12 more rigs. You will have 8 to 2 until then. So that will be not until 27, or have I misinterpreted?
We'll have the decline completed by Q3 next year if all the permitting and execution goes to plan. and that's when we'll have the rigs. Hopefully we can get some rigs underground while we're developing, but that's all a discussion in progress with the underground contractors who like a clean operational environment, whereas we'd like to get progressively build up the rigs as the decline's advancing. So we'll see where that goes, but definitely by the time the decline's completed, that's when we'll by Q3 next year, when we'll have the 20 rigs plus 2. Today it's 8 plus 2, to be correct.
And your cost of capital would allow you to potentially accelerate, but I presume that the only realistic sort of at least surface rig acceleration would be if you hit something very spectacular at at Leviathan essentially. Then you could add rigs there, but you're constrained from surface to 8 rigs at the western or the main exploration target area. Is that correct?
No, it's just sound. We have sound limits, and really it's 10 rigs on surface we feel is about the right. If there's more rigs out here to the east, then that's much less sound impact than if we put more rigs to the west, for example. So we just balance that off to make sure that we're compliant, and it's just then it's a matter of scheduling. But certainly 24-hour a day drilling. We're only drilling day shift at the moment. We can drill 24 hours a day when we get underground.
All right, we'll be pleased with that for now, and I guess we'll probably speak next time, I would imagine, towards the end of Q1 next year. So Godspeed in the meantime, and we'll keep watching those 100 gram meter plus holes continually be released here, and pray for the hope, or pray that you actually intersect the structure at 1.5 kilometers there. That would be excellent.
Yeah, and it's a great deposit, Gorm. It's continued to deliver, and we're now racing with this project with a very healthy treasury and a well enunciated plan we've talked about today to advance the project as quickly as we can, and that we are doing, and we're building a team to build it.